Okay, this is Change in the Coalfields. I'm your host, Coalfield Development CEO Brandon Dennison. This week we have Adam Hudson. Adam Hudson just got promoted as the Senior Director of Agriculture at Coalfield Development. Adam's been over a program of ours called Refresh Appalachia, popular program in sustainable agriculture for many years now. So Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, one of the things I love about the podcast is we get to hear the long version of the story. A lot of times we were in meetings together quite regularly, as members of the Coalfield team, but a lot of times that's all business. So we can slow down and just learn a little bit more about who you are and what makes you tick and what you care about, and your vision for sustainable agriculture here in Central Appalachia. So what got you interested in agriculture in the first place?
For me, that goes back to, I don't remember not being outside. My grandfather had a small farm in Lavalette, West Virginia. It had about 8 acres. He got that in 1965, and he grew everything on it you can possibly think of, had every living thing on it you could possibly think of all those years. And then in the 90s, where I was born, he just started a greenhouse. So I grew up in that environment with him having a small greenhouse business. And then I don't remember having the option to not be in the garden, but I also don't remember not wanting to be in the garden.
You just felt comfortable in that environment.
So we started raising a garden together. I can remember being as young as 6 or 7 years old, probably. Learning to drive a tractor at 10.
Nice.
So it was just all pretty organic for me.
Have you ever crashed a tractor?
Have I ever? Depends on how you define crash a tractor. I have nicked a post here and there.
Okay, that's fender bender.
I've bumped the barn. The one place on the barn that I'll lay claim to, that is from where I rammed the bucket into the end of it, but the building's still standing, so it wasn't that big of a deal.
You ever gotten stuck in a creek bed with a tractor?
I've never had to go through a creek bed in a tractor.
Okay.
So I don't think I've gotten stuck in. No, I don't think I've ever gotten it actually stuck up. Now, a lawnmower, yes. But an actual 4-wheel drive tractor, I've done pretty good about keeping it out of the mud and getting stuck in the field anywhere.
Describe, just in case a listener's never been in a greenhouse in Lavalette, humid West Virginia Julys. Describe that.
So, just for greenhouses come in all shapes and sizes. And the greenhouses we had were just pretty much like a basic shell of a hoop structure with plastic on top, 2 layers of plastic, got air force between the 2 layers of plastic to provide a little bit of a buffer. And then you've got fans on one end with vents on the other to pull air through to cool it down in the summertime. Still, in the summertime, without one that's got proper ventilation in it or even minimal ventilation, they get pretty hot and humid. And of course, in the wintertime, you've usually got a couple of furnaces and you've got fans going usually in the reverse direction to help push through the warm air, get circulation for warm air to maintain your temperature for your crops and whatever you've got growing in there in the wintertime.
What'd you guys grow in there?
He mostly did. He had 3 greenhouses, and all 3 of them were over 100 foot long. And he would raise mostly annuals. This time of year, late December, he would start getting in his seed and plugs. So you get 100 plugs in a tray, say like your Vinca or marigolds or something like that. They usually come a little bit later, but like white petunias would come in about this time of year. Geraniums just take a lot longer. So, and I can remember pulling up trays of dirt and you would just plug away. I got pretty quick at it after doing it for many, many years. And he would buy and sell and trade what he didn't grow well there with other businesses around. So say another greenhouse in the area grew red geraniums really well, but he didn't. He would grow with white ones, and then they would swap out to get the balance that they needed to meet their demands for what the local market wanted.
Gotcha. And was that his primary business, or did he have a whole career before agriculture?
He was a local 80 asbestos pipe fitter. He would the union for all those years and retired from that.
Okay.
So he started doing that not long after high school. He actually worked on the Greenbrier bunker.
No kidding.
Yeah. They were told, can't talk about this, didn't have to sign anything, but he worked on the bunker. He knew what they were doing. But that was one of his first, not a four, he was I think he was maybe a supervisor at the time when they did part of that still. He was just kind of a team lead or something like that.
Uh-huh. So he was doing asbestos, like installing it before they knew how bad it was?
Right.
Interesting.
So yeah, he thankfully didn't have any of the negative effects of it afterwards, because he worked his way up pretty quick to be a foreman on most jobs in the late 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. He was a foreman. One of the last jobs he got offered was the big nuclear plant down in Tennessee. Can't remember where that's at, but he always talked about he was offered to go lead that project, turned it down because he was about a year away from retirement, and decided that he wouldn't do that. He'd ride out where he was working at, which was at a plant down on the Ohio River near Portsmouth, is where he was at the time.
And then back to the greenhouse.
And then he opened up the greenhouse, and he never stopped working. I mean, all through the years he was working with the other job, he owned a hardware store too at the same time in Lavalette. So he had the hardware store he was operating, and he was working as a local 80. He was just didn't know how not to work. And I think that's where a lot of my work ethic, I know that comes from, is that drive and influence there.
That makes sense. Are there some key pieces of wisdom that he passed on to you that stay with you today?
I think making sure you plan out the job ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one. And then don't skimp on your supplies when you're building something you want to last.
Yeah, build it to last. Yeah. Quality.
If you look at any of the buildings around our property that he and I, a lot of them I built with him, they're built to last. Mm-hmm. He was one that if it could be done with a 2x4, he'd probably put a 2x6 on it, just to make sure it had the integrity and structural to last.
Do you still live on the farm?
I do.
You have those memories?
Mm-hmm. I do. I've been doing all that cleanup actually here the past couple of months, just cleaning up our old nursery pots and cleaning up some sheds and buildings where he'd left. He'd accumulated a lot of things over the years. As a farmer and entrepreneur, he did not want to get rid of things. He always thought he had a reason to keep some things. So there was just a lot that was left there. When he cut back from the greenhouses, all that plastic is hard to get rid of. Can't recycle most of those pots and things. So it's like we've been trying to sort through what's still good. And then I've had to, got a dumpster and really just cleaned up a lot of the property just to try and get it to a more manageable state.
Sure. Can you describe that property, and maybe do you have a favorite spot on the farm that gives you nourishment and peace?
Yeah. So it's kind of a weird spot really when you think of a farm. It's on your way up towards the lake in the county there at Beach Fork Lake. And it's, there's it feels more like a suburb to some extent when you're driving up through there, because you've got all these houses. All of them were built in the 60s, late and early 70s. And then there's a little offshoot for a little road called Beach Fork Circle. And he has a house at the top, and then you go behind that house and go down a little hill, and you've got the creek that borders the property there. And there's this flat spot where there's about 6.5 to 7 acres down there are flat.
Gotcha.
And fenced in. But you still got these neighbors up on the other end. So in the fall and winter, you can see most of the neighbors that are around. Summertime, you're kind of hidden away.
Yep. Tucked in.
Yeah. But it's creek borders half the property on there. So that's been, when I was younger, I probably would have said there, but there's a place for an old redbud tree that I like to go in the spring. You can peer right through the redbud, see the blooms, and you can see most of the property and the hills behind it. And that's probably one of my favorite spots.
I love that. By the redbud tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your parents stayed nearby, and you have a sister?
I do.
All right.
Dude, she just actually just earned her occupational therapy certificate. So she's going to start working with kids to do some occupational therapy with them. She got her degree in that. So
good for her.
Mm-hmm.
Good for her. And so did you go to public school?
I did.
Wayne County Public School.
Wayne County Public School, went Lavalette Elementary, then went to Wayne Middle, Wayne High School.
All right. Pioneer?
Yep, Pioneer all the way.
Were you in 4-H?
I was in 4-H for, since I think I was about 12 was when I started 4-H. I was in 4-H until you age out at 21.
What'd that mean to you?
That was where I think it developed another side of the agriculture love for me too, not just the doing the stuff, but actually the kind of the leadership side of it. So a lot of that was developed from doing that. And then pairing that with my experience in high school in ROTC in high school. So those two, they're kind of, I fell in love with the leadership side of that type of work too, not just the farming and growing things, but actually moving people towards a common goal, I think, to accomplish something that's bigger than oneself. To me, that was kind of a driving factor that kind of was resonating with me since that point.
Is that how you define leadership? That's a great definition.
I think so.
Honestly, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's how I usually would. That's my kind of go-to definition for it. And a lot of that stems to some influence from Carl Markham, the extension agent that really influenced me a lot to do what I do too.
I'm so glad you brought up Carl. That's an influence we share.
Yeah.
Right. So I was working on Coalfield initially in the summer of 2010. So where would you have been in 2010?
I would have been probably summer of 2010.
Yeah.
I guess I would have been a sophomore at Wayne High School.
Yeah. Because and that makes sense because the first time I ever heard about Adam Hudson was from Carl Markham. And he knew that part of the vision of Coalfield was to have an agriculture program. At the time, It was more construction. And he said, you really got to keep your eye on Adam Hudson. He said, that'll be a good one for us. And he was right. And Carl, a lot of folks, if you follow the Act Now Coalition, we built on this metaphor of a flock of geese,
right?
And trying to be a flock of geese rather than a barrel full of crabs. And that came from Carl. That I first heard that metaphor from Carl. Just a wise man, old country boy, grew up on a farm himself, an extension agent, and he, just like you, he made the same point that we need to do ag, but we also need to look at our whole community and get people engaged again.
Right. Yeah, I did the Brushy Fork Leadership Institute through Berea College, and he co-led that with, I guess it was Peter Hilly at the time.
That's right.
And that was my first interaction with Peter back then. And at the time, I think I was one of the younger people to have done that Leadership Institute. And
so you were.
Got out of school to go do that.
That's awesome.
And we talked a lot about the different community projects and ran across some of that work not too long ago when I was cleaning out some files and looking through some documents. So
you dropped that off to me.
Yeah, I dropped one of them off to you to look over that Carl kind of put together. I think it might have been when he was finishing up some master's work he was required to do to maintain his position and stuff with extension. And he put together this document of just wisdom. I don't know a better way to say it than just some wisdom and kind of thoughts on leadership and community and how to develop that and kind of where we should be going.
What a good guy.
Yeah.
He was part of something called the Wayne County Hubcap team.
Right.
And that was connected with the West Virginia Community Development Hub. And I also was a part of that in that summer of 2010. And the idea was you come together as a team, you have a project you work on for your community. Ours was getting the Beach Fork Lodge get built, which is this sort of lifelong, what's the word? It's like a carrot dangled in front of us that is never actually given to us.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe one day it'll happen. But you also work on developing it as leaders. And so even though we didn't get the lodge done, and we actually did get it done, the governor came and signed. It's a sore point, rabbit trail. I'll try not to go down. But the leadership development's still worth it. You still carry that forward.
Right.
Charity Dameron was another person on that team.
Another great person.
Yeah. Tell us about Charity.
Charity was, she was over the FRN.
Yeah. Family Resource Network.
And suddenly passed away. Just a great she was a foster parent too. And then she was engaged. You went to a community meeting in Wayne County. Back then, she was there.
Every time.
She was there to make sure that stuff was happening. And she was a voice for people who maybe voices were quiet. She was the loud one to making sure everybody had their voice heard.
Because she'd experienced firsthand a lot of the challenges we talk about. We say, socioeconomic disadvantage. She'd been through that, but she didn't let that define her.
Right.
Just a fighter. So honestly, gave me a hard time. A lot of time. She would hold you accountable.
Yeah.
And tell you what she thought, but you'd be better off for it by the end of it. And it was always for the best. She always had the best of Wayne County at her core.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of good influences.
There's a lot of them. A lot of good people from Wayne County.
What other stuff did you do for fun growing up? in Wayne County?
Music.
Yep.
Music, come from some musical family, singing quartet type music in churches and playing instruments. And that was something that we did a lot of. I mean, for a long time, especially growing up, we were in a church every other weekend, sometimes singing at a revival or something. And that was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun to do that. And
do you have a favorite hymn?
Favorite hymn for me, it's a hard question to ask.
I know.
Amazing Grace is a typical one, right? But when you really look at how it was written, I mean, in a pentatonic scale, which is typical of like African American inspired music too, to me, that makes me look at it from a different lens than somebody just saying, oh, they love Amazing Grace.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at it from that and the fact that it's thought that maybe the melody even come from where John Newton was on the slave ships or something like that is more powerful to me than just, oh, my favorite song's Amazing Grace.
Mm-hmm. So you finished at Wayne. You're in the 4-H in the ROTC. And then you went to Berea.
Yeah. I applied to Berea. Carl Markham was the one who really mentioned Berea, as well as a guidance counselor at Wayne. And they said, you should check out Berea. So I did. And actually, I got turned down the first, because they do a couple of different cycles. And I'd gotten a letter where they said, I think it was still under question. So they wanted me to answer a few more questions first. I don't think it was actually being declined the first time, because they do a couple of different enrollment periods, how they do it. But then I believe it was around Christmas of my senior year, I got the official notification to go to Berea. Had no clue what I was really getting into, going to this small hippie college in Kentucky. And I feel like that's the place that I really grew into myself, was at Berea.
Some folks might not know. Can you tell us a little bit of the history of Berea and what makes it unique?
Yeah, so Berea was founded in 1855 as they were integrated then before they were told they couldn't be integrated. And they were the first college in the South technically to be integrated whenever they were allowed to integrate. And then so a history of just abolitionism and just inclusion. I mean, their motto was God hath made of one people. God hath made from one blood all people of the earth. Mm-hmm. So just that alone being the motto, not necessarily a Christian school, but founded on some Christian principles of all people need to be loved and included, basically. And, it's a small school, only about 1,500 students, but they've got a variety of degrees, and they've got a Bachelor's of Science in Agriculture and Natural Resources, which I'm proud to say that that's what I graduated there with.
Program.
And I worked on the college farm, with one of the oldest work-study colleges in the country, too. So you're able to work there and pay off your tuition. I graduated there with no debt because of the work-study program. I wasn't able to save much, but I didn't have any debt. So not having that debt,
big deal.
It's a big deal. And that's their mission, is to serve primarily Appalachia, but they've got over 50 countries usually represented as well. And it's geared towards those who don't have, usually financial means is a big, those are the students they try to cater towards. So higher poverty, higher, whatever your risk might be, similar to the Coalfields model of the kind of demographic and people we work with here. Berea does similar and same thing, and then include an environmental lens, and then the side of work they try to they promote community work too. So they have got their hand on a lot of different things. That
special place. Mm-hmm. Were any of your assumptions challenged while you were at Berea? When you say you grew a lot, mm-hmm. Did you change too, or was it more just discovering yourself?
I think my ideas on faith grew to be more broader, more ability to step back and listen better. I think for me, that was a big takeaway from Berea, was that. And and that's one thing with Berea too. Usually in another college, you're going to take all classes that are kind of within your degree path.
Okay.
I took dance classes. I had to take religion classes, music classes, ag classes,
try it all.
Chemistry. I mean, because you're required to take some of these different things as a liberal arts school too, and just the way they have it They want you to be well-rounded and have an idea of how to do all this critical thinking. And I think to me, they were always challenging your way of thinking. And you might think you know how to do something, or might think this one thing, then the next thing you know, they're challenging the way they taught you how to think previously.
Again.
So you're always evolving that thought process. And I think this is Berea is really where I discovered myself, and I, being able to identify as gay coming out of Berea too, which is not something that I was necessarily comfortable doing as a young male high schooler in rural West Virginia growing up.
Sure. Found that courage and comfort.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And inclusion.
Yep.
Have you carried forward? I mean, you mentor a lot of people now, and you have over the years, and you do now in your role. Have you carried forward some of the lessons from Berea into how you mentor others?
Definitely. Because at Berea, I think one thing that really helped with that too is working on the college where you're in the work study program. I was a supervisor by my junior and senior year. I was more of a supervisor. So like all the freshmen that went through that year, remember the farm manager didn't teach them how to drive the tractor that year. They had enough confidence in me to do that. And I think I always consider myself not to be a patient person, but I get told all the time that I am pretty patient.
Well, that's interesting. You don't think of yourself as patient.
I don't think of myself as patient. I think of myself as I want to get it done. I want this to happen now. Let's do it. But I get told a lot of times, I guess, especially when I'm teaching or instructing somebody, that I'm pretty patient.
Yeah.
Which I guess, I can step back and admit, because I don't want them, there's no point to freak out and make them panic because I want to get it done.
Right.
Because they're not going to learn anything. So I think for me, that's one of the mentorship that I take with the most is, all right, we're working on the fence here, or you don't know how to do it. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm going to show you how to. Let's take the time. Let's show you how to do it.
What a great lesson! I think both pushing and being accountable for getting work done, but not in such a frantic way that the learning can't happen.
Right.
What a great mentorship lesson. Well, how did you go from Berea college student to Refresh Appalachia?
It's an interesting story, and kind of, they say things come back around, I guess. And I remember, I guess it was 2015 or 16. I think me and you met briefly then. And you had sent me what was called the Refresh business plan. And I didn't even remember it until after I got hired.
Because you were an intern with the state agriculture.
I interned for a summer with the Department of Agriculture.
And ironically, I would met you in Mason County, right? You were in a high tunnel.
We met at Fort. Maybe we either met there or we met when we were visiting the Fort, what was going to be the Fort Gay hub.
That could have been too.
That they were working on. But I had applied for extension positions all over Kentucky, some even Tennessee. And when I was graduating Berea, I honestly didn't know where I was going to go. And I came back here without much of a plan. And then I was told, a good friend of my grandfather's, Don Perdue, who was a delegate and EDA director for a while, said, come on up to the EDA office. I've got somebody I want you to meet. Introduced me to Park Ferguson, who was doing a lot of agriculture in the schools.
Another farmer.
Agriculture work, farmer.
Wayne County farmer.
Wayne County. He was a Wayne High School graduate too. And he introduced me to Ben Gilmer, who was the president of Refresh, over a quick email. I think that was like on a Friday. And then I sent Ben my email or my resume. And he said, let's do an interview on Monday. So we did a quick phone call interview on a Monday. Said, I'll be at West Edge on Friday. Come down and see me. I went down and met Savannah Lyons, who was working for us here at the time.
Yep.
And then we had a conversation in the high tunnel. And then
classic interview setting for it.
Yeah. And then we, he called me on, I think about Thursday or Friday, he called me, offered me the job. And that's how I got started at Refresh as a special projects coordinator.
Which basically means a little bit of everything.
That's what I always
needed.
say. So that means I can do everything else that nobody else has the time to do. And I did that for about 8 months. But I used that time wisely, and I learned how to do everybody else's job very well during that time. I wanted to be as flexible as possible to make sure that I knew how to do everything, because sometimes I had to step in for a crew chief. Sometimes I had to step in.
The first time I saw you in that role, we're processing chickens, the mobile processing unit on a former mountaintop removal site.
Yep.
Pretty unique job.
Yep. I had to pull that trailer along a couple of different places in the state. I did not like pulling the trailer. It's one thing I don't like doing, is pulling a trailer or driving a big truck.
I'm so touched right now. I have chills. Just my story, Coalfield story, your story. It's all so interwoven. I mean, Don Purdue was my first boss when I was
right.
getting Coalfield started. There wasn't actually any money for payroll, so I helped Don at the Economic Development Authority. Park and Lacey become very good friends. They're now in the Erlings building, which is our first major project. Charity and Carl being initial mentors, Ben Gilmer being a mutual friend. It's just amazing how it all just sort of keeps
a lot
weaving together. But ultimately, people who just love this place and are just committed.
That's the common thread
to it, seeing its full potential finally.
Yeah.
And you're right in the middle of that, man.
And right where I think I need to be.
Well, agriculture in Central Appalachia is a tough business. So tell the listener a little bit, what makes it so tough, and what is your vision for agriculture's role in our new economy?
So what makes agriculture? I mean, agriculture is tough anywhere, but then you layer in these mountains and trying to transport product over these hills and through these valleys to get it from one market to the next. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is just trying to weave all that together and make it financially make sense for the farmer. And then the fact that most of the farmers are not your large scale farmers. They are more of your medium, and some of them are smaller scale farmers. Not growing on hundreds of acres. They've got 10 acres here that's flat.
They're not going to win an economies of scale competition.
It's probably never going to happen in an economy of scale, not with the size of some of these farmers. So they're trying to do more creative, with high tunnels and then tiered agroforestry type projects, things like that, to really diversify. And those are some of the biggest challenges I think I see, is just the logistics and topography we have to deal with. And then and that kind of goes back to the economies of scale with the size of the farms. So, but I think that also leads to an opportunity for us too, because we can do some creative and unique things that you can't do anywhere else, and put a story behind it that I think is a story that nobody else can tell from an Appalachian farmer's perspective. The fact that, we're doing some of this cool work too on former strip mines too. Mm-hmm. Figuring how do we have solar panels with maybe, sheep grazing underneath of them, or, growing crops eventually once you get soil bases back. There's just a lot of work going into that too, that maybe that helps us offset that scale a little bit too, where you've got some economy of scale there, or at least it's specific enough to where it does make sense.
Yeah. And I believe it's worth it, even though it is really hard. And tell us some of the reasons that it's worth the fight to figure out ag in Central Appalachia, even though it is so hard.
If we didn't have some system in place during COVID, there would have been people in this state and in this region that would have gone hungry. We were able to help secure supply chains because we had local supply chains with local people, local product that was not from thousands of miles away, but it was within, a couple hundred miles away within Central Appalachia, to meet schools or food banks, even some restaurants that needed that product.
Yeah, I
think that there to me is the biggest reason why, because people have always got to eat, and the quality of that food too is so much better than something on a truck for days.
Strong argument. Yep. Turns out it's pretty vulnerable to depend on your food from 2,000 miles away. Yep. It's also not so healthy.
Right.
A lot of our health outcomes right now, we've got to find a way to eat healthier.
Right.
Well, what are some of for agriculture at Coalfield? I know you just became the co-chair of the CAN working group for sustainable agriculture. Refresh continues to grow and innovate. So tell us about some of your priorities looking ahead to 2023.
So we've got several priorities. One of them is just our trainings and engagement with the communities we're working in. I think for us to really expand our farmer network and kind of reestablish us as a leader within that a little bit better. With COVID, we're kind of coming out of just some up and down connections there. We've got a really good, stable staff right now, and the people in place that can really make that happen. So doing some of these trainings to really figure out what is needed to get to that point, a more sustainable system.
Yep.
So helping provide those trainings, that's a big priority for us. And to that, that's going to feed the aggregation distribution work we're doing. And we're partnering with Appalachian Sustainable Development out of Virginia, and then and the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks out of Ohio. We're on a couple of regional food grants with them. And we've seen some progress moving some dairy product from Southeast Ohio to Food Bank and some local markets in Huntington, just being able to distribute that product. And we've having some really good traction with, and then that kind of takes us to our next with Farm to School. And we're just having some really great progress in 2 counties right now. We're piloting with having an AmeriCorps who's doing some in-class activities. So teaching kids about, cutting open a pumpkin, looking at the circumference of it, counting the seeds, things like that, to really get kids excited about the agriculture work.
That's great.
And just getting them excited about local food, and then doing some tastings to get them exposed to things they normally wouldn't eat. So, kale, microgreens, things like that. And then we're able to turn around with this network of partners and provide on an offer sheet, here you can purchase this too. You can purchase this local lettuce, tomatoes, kale, and have it into your schools. And we're moving towards that direction and getting the orders up to where it's starting to make sense for some of the farmers we're working with.
That's so cool. I mean, is that accurate to say you're really trying to develop a new agriculture system for Central Appalachia?
Yeah, I think so. We're trying to build off of the agricultural system within this country is not sustainable or sufficient. It's built with a lot of subsidies and a lot of just older laws and mindsets in mind. And what we're trying to build is, how do we build this more local, regional food system that is viable and sustainable for both the producer, the farmer making the product, and then the consumer on the other side too. So therefore, making a more secure food system.
Yep. Just keep going, keep it up. The question I like to close out with everybody, what are some big changes that you've seen in Appalachia in your lifetime that you're happy about? What are some big change, or maybe some changes that you're not happy about too? And what are some changes that you still hope to see in the near future?
Yeah, I think for me, one significant change living near Huntington for me, when I left to go to college back in 2013, Huntington was still it was known to be drugs were really bad then.
Yep.
And there wasn't a lot of local offerings. And then coming back after that, and in the past few years even, you've got a very vibrant local food scene.
Mm-hmm.
And the crime rate has decreased. There's not as many abandoned buildings. Just the work that the city is able to put into, a lot of it comes from where they got the Best Communities grant. I think that helped a lot because they actually put it in places that were successful to invest in.
Yeah.
Seeing that change to me it's made me very proud to be from the area, I think. And
that's great.
And then, there's been a lot that's happened, I think, but then there's been a lot that's you hear talk about. I think that's still
Fork Lodge, for example,
the lodge,
still not built.
They talk about the opportunity and then it doesn't happen. But I think there's still a lot of opportunity with like tourism activities like that and agriculture. We're testing it alone on our regenerative mine site down in Mingo County. There's ways to think creatively with a lot of these problems and not just have I think a lot of times we think with too narrow of a focus sometimes. And if we're able to expand our thought and think, well, it doesn't have to be just agriculture. What happens if we do put some cabins on this site and we have some solar panels, or we open a racetrack? I don't know. Let's play with the idea.
What might work?
Yeah. And I think that excites me, and I think gives me I'd like to see more of that and more openness in those conversations too, to just let the dreams fly a little bit.
Yep.
Instead of just shooting them down as soon as they get off the ground.
Sure.
And I think a lot of that happens from all points too, but especially from our leadership and legislation, to take interest in what's going on in the communities and being aware of how or what can be most helpful for the communities within the state.
Being willing to get a little creative there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just cling to everything that has been.
Right.
But what might could come next.
Yeah. I mean, in order for that real change to happen, you've got to get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, great point. Well, Adam, the work you're doing, I genuinely admire it. And Wayne County and Central Appalachia is better off for it. And it's been fun to hear a little bit more in depth your descriptions of growing up here and the greenhouse and your favorite redbud tree and your development at Berea and how you found Refresh. It's quite a story.
Yeah.
And hopefully it gives other young Appalachians a lot of hope and encouragement. And I'm sure that it will.
Yep. It's been fun.
All right. See you next time.
Thanks.